2 weeks after seizing control of Afghanistan, the Taliban finalized plans for a new government. And the U.S. Supreme Court refuses to intervene after the state of Texas passes one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. We'll have much more on Texas's abortion law in just a moment, but first we begin in Afghanistan. Just days after the last U.S. forces left the country, the Taliban are preparing to announce a new government. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar is expected to be appointed as president, and Habatullah Akhundzada will continue as the supreme leader of Afghanistan. It's unlikely there will be any leaders named from the previous government. In a sign of solidarity, dozens of women marched in front of the finance ministry in Kabul, demanding involvement in the Afghan government. Women are also seeking the right to continue to work and receive an education. And a plane from the United Arab Emirates packed with food and medical supplies arrived at the Kabul airport on Friday. The United Nations also resumed humanitarian flights to the cities of Mazar-e-Sharif and Kandahar. The United Nations says about 18 million people, about half of Afghanistan's population, many need some form of humanitarian assistance to survive. Well, for more on the developments in Afghanistan, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Ameshia Cross. She's a Democratic Party strategist and political analyst. John Sitilides is a geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors and a consultant with the U.S. Department of State. Joseph Williams is a senior news editor with U.S. News and World Report. And Omar Samad served as the Afghan ambassador to France and Canada and is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Ambassador, let me start with you again. We've had no official announcement yet on the government in Afghanistan, but according to some reports, and those names I mentioned there, Mullah Habatullah Akhundzada will be the country's spiritual leader. He'll be based in Kandahar. And then Abdul Ghani Baradar will be the president, and he'll be based in Kabul. Some are referring to this as the Iranian model, where you'd have leaders in two different parts of the country, with, in this case, the seat of power being really in Kandahar rather than in Kabul. What do you make of it?
Well, and I think we do need final information and a formal announcement in the next few days. I think there are a lot of rumors flying. There are a lot of lists even being posted online about who may get what portfolio. But I think that the Taliban are still having consultations about the government, who to bring in, how to divide power and share power. Whether to what extent they're going to share power has to be seen. Who is going to get which portfolios, because some portfolios, as you know, are much more important than others. But some portfolios require certain proficiencies and certain skill sets that the Taliban may not have, and would have to rely on technocrats and even possibly officials from the previous government, not probably at the highest levels, but maybe junior or secondary levels. But nonetheless, I think that the Taliban are close to announcing it, and it is going to be the first test. It is going to be a major indicator to Afghans as well as to the international community as to what Taliban thinking is about power and power sharing.
Right. We are hearing from Afghanistan, though, that part of that delay in announcing the full government is attributed to the fact that the Taliban is seeking international support while it draws up this list of the government that it wants to announce. What does that tell us?
Well, that may be one reason, one calculation on the part of the Taliban. It tells us that the Taliban feel uneasy about all the demands and all the conditions that have been put forth in the past couple of weeks by international stakeholders, especially in the West, less in the region. If you look at, for example, statements by the Chinese, the Russians, the Pakistanis, and the Iranians, they have been a bit more mute and neutral, whereas the red lines and the conditions put forth by Western nations have been much more obvious and clear in terms of what is expected and what's not expected. I also have to say that the Taliban, I think, as I mentioned, are still having to resolve some internal issues. And let's not forget that there's a bit of an insurgency going on in the Panjshir province in the valley that has claimed to not want to agree to everything the Taliban want and prefers maybe to negotiate under different terms.
Right.
And that fighting actually now seems to have reached new heights.
Right. I want to get to that insurgency in a moment, but for now I want to get to John Sitilides. John, it's been some time since we've had you on the show. Great to see you. President Biden, as we are aware, has come under biting criticism from some quarters for the manner in which this withdrawal was staged. In fact, a Washington Post ABC poll shows people disapproved of the evacuation by a margin of 2-1. But at the same time, there is overwhelming support in the country across party lines for ending this war. What is your opinion on what we've witnessed over the past few weeks?
I think that's a fairly accurate statement that you've just presented here, Anand. And there is widespread support across the American nation, Republicans and Democrats alike, to bring the Afghanistan war as it's been fought, as it's been waged for the last 20 years, to an end. Several $1 trillion sunk into Afghanistan, really with very little respect or knowledge of Afghanistan's culture and history, looking to impose American and Western institutions, values, and norms on a pre-national culture that has a majority population that seeks to live as if it were the 7th century. And so the tactics militarily and politically did not match the counterterrorism strategy that was part of the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan to oust the Taliban for harboring al-Qaeda. Having said that, I think there is significant criticism, certainly among Republicans, but even among a large number of Democrats, for the manner in which the evacuation was conducted. And clearly, I think if the Biden administration were somewhat more straightforward about the fact that it had been caught flat-footed, many top officials were planning their annual summer vacations when the Taliban swept through the country and seized Kabul so quickly, we wouldn't have had perhaps such a chaotic withdrawal. Now the problem is that there are massive weapons caches in Afghanistan to rearm the Taliban and possibly rearm global jihad. And there are probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees headed to the European Union.
John, was there a different way to do it?
Look, I don't know that anyone is going to be a fair and objective Monday morning quarterback. I would say almost everybody who's been following Afghanistan has gotten this wrong. And most of us, if we had bothered to read, and I'll include myself in this, Anand, the Inspector General's reports year after year since 2008 or 2009, we would have understood what a chaotic situation we had created in Afghanistan. But I believe if the withdrawal had begun much earlier, President Biden made his decision in April, and there really is no reason why they shouldn't have begun to inform all of those allies and partners and guards and interpreters of the U.S. forces and the U.S. diplomats and the U.S. expats to have a more orderly withdrawal process. But very, very simply, Anand, first you get out the civilians, then you destroy the weapons, then you get out your forces, and then you bomb the bases that are left behind. It's a simple 3 or 4 step formula, and I don't know why we failed to do that.
Ameshia Cross, part of the criticism that President Biden is getting is because he has left a few hundred Americans behind in Afghanistan, as well as thousands of Afghans who worked with the Americans in Afghanistan who want to get out. This is what the opposition House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy had to say. Let's listen.
What I see is probably the biggest failure in American government on a military stage in my lifetime. And we could never make this mistake again. And I cannot imagine any individual that is in a policy-making position knowingly made a decision politically when to leave and knowingly telling the American public 2 weeks before that they will not leave until every American's home, but decide they're going to leave Americans there.
So, Ameshia, is this going to cost the president politically down the line?
No, I think that down the line we're going to see, and history is going to write itself when it comes to the strategic ability to not only recognize with 3 presidents before Biden not, that not only was it time to pull troops out, but that time had passed years ago. This was an immediate thing that needed to be done. And again, I say this because we saw it with Obama, we saw it with Trump. This was something that all three wanted to have done over time. And it was just that Joe Biden had the courage to do it despite how the press was going to turn the tide here. And I will say this, as somebody who sits on the Truman National Security Project, there are obvious ways to pull out of a war, but at the end of the day, to avoid atrocities is extremely difficult. And I think that there has to be an understanding that the Taliban was going to regain power in Afghanistan regardless. Had we had seen President Biden wait until October, November, because we've heard some people mention pulling out, in the fall, in the winter season, things would have been different. They would not have. Quite frankly, the Afghan government was not willing to do what it needed to do. It was not sustainable. It was basically a money pit that America, as well as our European allies, had thrown trillions of dollars in over the past 2 decades that was not going to be able to sustain itself. And that's just plain and simple. The American people largely wanted to have our troops home years ago. And at this point, if we are to believe what some of the naysayers say, we might have been in Afghanistan for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And an endless war is not one that the American people honestly wanted to see happen. There was no way to tidy this up and to put a bow on it and to pull out without having some level of atrocity. It's just not possible. I think that we as Americans have a very odd view of how wars are supposed to end, especially wars that you do not win, which Afghanistan was not winnable, and the mission had changed significantly. This was not a humanitarian mission. It was not one to protect women and girls. That was not the reason why American troops were in Afghanistan, that 2,500 lives were lost by Americans, that $2 trillion were spent. That was not why we were there. It was literally an operation to hunt down Osama bin Laden, and it was one to basically disrupt the Taliban, which at the end of the day did not happen. We see a different version of the Taliban in 2021 than we did 20 years ago, but at the end of the day, they were going to take control of that government, and that just is what it is. And I think that historically speaking, when we look back on this 20 years from now, the history books are going to look upon Biden and say that what he did was a smart move because we weren't going to get out of this any other way.
That's right. The bottom line in all of this, Ameshia, you're right, is that he did end the war. Joseph Williams, President Biden ended the war, but he still faces some daunting challenges which are coming up. As I said, there are hundreds of Americans left in Afghanistan right now. There are thousands of Afghans that worked with the Americans who want to get out. There are also thousands, tens of thousands of Afghans who want to leave Afghanistan because they do not want to live under the Taliban. Then you add to that impending questions that are going to come up in Congress on how the United States was caught so flat-footed when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan. And then there's issues over the resettlement of refugees in this country, etc. So would it be fair to say then that this is going to be a domestic political issue for this administration for some time to come?
I think they're going to be dealing with the fallout, certainly. I do agree that there is no neat way to tie up and put a bow on it, but I also agree with the fact that the SIGAR report, this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan report, did precursor some of this. He did predict that it was going to be a difficult situation and that there were a lot of challenges that the U.S. didn't come to grips with. I think it's going to be a political challenge for President Biden, mainly because you have such Republican criticism and you've got criticism among Democrats, and you've got a whole week and a half, 2 weeks worth of chaotic scenes at the airport. You've got 13 military personnel dead. So there is going to be political fallout. How long it lasts depends on whether or not Afghanistan remains stable. It's an unstable situation right now. The Taliban faces its own challenges after coming to power from revolution. Now they've got to pivot to governing, and we all know that that's a lot more difficult than they've seen before, given the humanitarian challenges, given the fact that they've got a population that does not want to be ruled by them, that does not want them to be in control. So it's going to be a political problem for President Biden if all the refugees don't get out, because there are going to be some Americans that were left behind. That's going to happen as well. But he pledged to bring everyone home who wants to come home. But that's going to be an issue because we don't have diplomats on the ground, we don't have military intelligence on the ground in order to strike back at some of these threats. There are going to be civilian casualties when we do strike back. So it's going to linger like a haunting refrain, unfortunately, for the Biden administration. Yes, the political impact may be blunted over time, but there still will be hot spots and challenges that will crop up from time to time that he's going to have to deal with.
But would it cost him, the president, Joseph, as well as the Democrat Party, would it cost them votes, really? Because do people vote on foreign policy issues?
They tend not to, but that's because there are challenges here at home that are present in the lives of every American. Yes, foreign policy is a bad look. There are going to be campaign commercials reminding people of what happened over these last 2.5 weeks. However, there is a pandemic going on. There are economic challenges. There are breadbasket, kitchen table issues that people will in fact vote on, and the scenario there isn't any sunnier than it is in Afghanistan. There are many, many challenges, and this is just one of them that he's going to have to make a case to the American people why he should remain in charge, why their party should remain in charge after we've seen such problems over the course of the last month and a half.
Ambassador, I want to get back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, and those are the clashes that have been reported from the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan between the Taliban and resistance forces there. In fact, the BBC broadcast a video earlier today of the former Vice President, Amrullah Saleh, who says that he is in the valley there and he is leading the resistance. The Taliban, for its part, have issued a statement saying that they have defeated the resistance in that part of Afghanistan. What do we know about the state of the battle over there?
Well, Anand, the situation is changing and evolving very fast. By the hour, you hear different things from different quarters. I think that the last reliable bit of news that I heard from someone that I actually know personally says, this is about an hour and a half ago, says that there are major clashes taking place in two locations, one Parian, one Anjuman. These locations are deep in the heart of the Panjshir Valley. They're not on the outskirts. They're not at the beginning of the valley or at the end of the valley. So this means that the Taliban have been able to penetrate the Panjshir Valley somehow from some of the various access points that exist. And this means that the situation is very volatile and it could change. I've also heard that the Taliban are once again negotiating with Ahmad Massoud, the son of late Ahmad Shah Massoud, but not with Amrullah Saleh, the former vice president. It's not clear whether he's still in the valley or not, but there may be a political deal with part of the Panjshiri elite and not others, or there may be a full package negotiation going on that may end up with some kind of a settlement. But right now, there have been losses on both sides.
John, there's also fallout for the president from Europe right now. We're hearing from Europe that your NATO leaders, especially in Europe, are unhappy with the way in which the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. Of course, we have to remember that a lot of European troops went in with United States troops when Afghanistan was first invaded 20 years ago. But now we're hearing that the Europeans are beginning to reassess their relationship with Biden. Has there been some damage done here?
I think there's been some initial damage, but all of this will take some time to shake out, Anand. And there's the immediate reactions, and then it's a matter of understanding what's going to be happening in Afghanistan, and in particular for Europe, exactly how many refugees and migrants are headed that way. They're crossing into Iran right now, but as we know, Turkey has just completed a 500-kilometer, 9-foot-tall wall on its border with Iran, and Greece has completed a wall along its border with Turkey. So there's much less tolerance in the European Union for refugees and migrants compared to what took place in 2015 and 2016. So I think that's the immediate concern for Europe over the next several months, because it takes about 20 to 30 days for individuals to walk across the terrain from the Afghan-Iran border to the Greece-Turkey border. So we'll know by the end of September or mid-October whether we have a refugee crisis. In terms of diplomatic relations, yes, I believe that those leaders that are responsible to their societies for national leadership, whether it comes to Afghanistan or the NATO alliance, feel somewhat embarrassed. We know that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson took a day and a half to get through to President Biden. German Chancellor Merkel was incensed that she feels that her forces were not able to evacuate on an orderly basis. So we have some of that going on right now, but let me just add one more point very quickly, Anand. Regarding the Panjshir Valley battle, in an ideal situation, the U.S. and the NATO alliance would be able to provide air cover for the National Resistance Front. But right now, because we may have hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans being held de facto hostage in Afghanistan at the mercy of the Taliban, we're rendered utterly helpless. It's a major military constraint on the U.S. and NATO military in southern Afghanistan.
But that would mean, John, it would just mean continuing the war in another guise, wouldn't it?
Well, here's the problem. The Taliban have been our enemy for 20 years. They're a terrorist organization that are now about to become the sovereign government. And we have to figure out how to rebalance this relationship and see to it that we're not at war with a country or with a government that has control over the lives of many American citizens.
Right. Ambassador Samad, the United States has also frozen $7 billion in assets belonging to the Afghan Central Bank, and the IMF has blocked access to something like $460 million in emergency reserves. I mean, that's a pretty big obstacle for the Taliban as they try to get to rule the country or get to grips with running the country, don't they?
Absolutely. Let me make a point here about what John said.
Yeah.
There are between 100 to 150 Afghan Americans who are in Afghanistan, and they're considered American citizens, of course, for America.
Yeah.
And we don't know exactly if they wanted to leave or not. Some of them are there because they want to be there, and some of them may want to leave, and we don't know for a fact. So let's not make something out of this that it's not. There are not thousands of Americans stranded there or taken hostage. The Taliban are supposed to open the airport. The Qataris and the Turks are now on the ground helping Afghans open the Covenant National Airport. Hopefully that will bring in some relief. Today, the UAE brought in a plane full of humanitarian assistance. I think the international community needs to understand that with all the doubts that we have about the Taliban, at this point, the humanitarian situation is of utmost urgency.
Right.
We can't let 18 million Afghans who go asleep hungry and have no means of sustaining themselves die at the end of this war. And this is something that we inherited from Ashraf Ghani. Let's not forget, the mess at the airport was also caused because Ashraf Ghani left his office and fled the country, and everybody was facing a fait accompli. And so we can blame everyone we want to for political reasons. For us Afghans, Ashraf Ghani did not do what he was supposed to do, and the economic situation also is something that we have inherited from him.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you so much. And this is where we say goodbye to you, Ambassador. Thanks for your insights on what has been happening in Afghanistan. We're going to turn now to a U.S. domestic issue, and that is the abortion debate here. I want to go to Ameshia Cross for this. Ameshia, there is a massive debate right now over abortion rights in the United States. For decades, we know that in the United States, women had the right to abortions under a U.S. Supreme Court decision, a ruling known as Roe versus Wade. Now it's in jeopardy because the state of Texas has outlawed abortions at 6 weeks. And as I said, there's a big debate, but does this mean the end of Roe versus Wade?
So to put this more into context for you and your audience, at the end of the day, yes, the Supreme Court codified abortion under Roe v. Wade, but states, particularly those Republican-led states across the South, have been fighting tooth and nail against Roe v. Wade and chipping away at it for decades now. For instance, the state of Mississippi only has one abortion clinic for the entire state. States have been penalizing abortion providers up to and including felony jail prison time, in addition to, again, making it extremely hard for individuals to access them. We know that because of heartbeat bills, which is essentially kind of what Texas tried to do with this 6-week ban. What we also know is that the majority of women do not know that they are pregnant at 6 weeks. The average woman does not know until she's around week 12. So this, in effect, would actually cancel any types of abortions for individuals, over 90% of individuals who are actually interested in getting them. My frustration with the Texas bill specifically, or the Texas law now, is that it also puts power in the hands of everyday individuals to basically play blame game on women who are seeking safe abortions. That means that if a neighbor decides that they don't like that an abortion is happening, they can call and they can report the person who drove the individual to the clinic. They can report the clinic staff. They can report the woman herself. And at the end of the day, fines and fees will be added to those individuals who are seen as helping someone to get an abortion. It's frustrating. It's a penalty to women. It's a decision that is being made largely by men who will never, in fact, be pregnant at all. And there is also no exception for rape or incest. This law is disgusting, and unless the federal government intervenes congressionally, it's going to stand, and we're going to see more states basically create a domino effect and copy this bill across the country.
Joseph Williams, what are your thoughts on the points that Ameshia raised right at the end there, about the residents of the state of Texas being able to sue clinics, doctors, nurses, and even people who drive a woman to get the procedure? They can sue people for at least $10,000. Some have referred to this as a bounty. In fact, the president called it a vigilante system, which he said is un-American. I mean, is it open to abuse here?
Clearly. I mean, it's very difficult to not abuse this sort of a system. And Ameshia's right in that this is very much an assault against women and very much the continuation of something that the Republican Party has seemed to put in place decades ago that has only finally got their culmination, because we've seen restrictive abortive policies. We've seen states defund and punish Planned Parenthood. We had the Hyde Amendment back in the late 80s where federal money can't be used for terminating a pregnancy. And now the crowning jewel was the 6-3 Supreme Court supermajority, which in fact allowed this law to go into place by not acting and by not offering an injunction. And the bounty system here was specifically created in order to get the Supreme Court at a disadvantage, because it's not a state enforcing a law, it's an individual enforcing a state law. The individual has the right to spy on somebody or to look on somebody and claim that this is the problem, and that relieves the state of the burden, and that takes the Supreme Court out of the equation. And the Supreme Court is going to look at that Mississippi law, and that's where the rubber meets the road. Now, I'll make one point really quickly, and that is that it presents a problem for Republicans as well as the Supreme Court, because now that there's a lot of hue and cry and a lot of upset over it among women voters, among Democrats, and they're mobilizing, the Supreme Court has got a very difficult decision to make on whether or not they uphold either of these two laws and whether or not they go down in history as the court that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Right. John, I've got a minute left, just over a minute. What do you make of this Texas law and the fact that it's going to be using or encourages ordinary citizens to enforce the provisions of the law? Also, one other thing, John, doesn't it exacerbate inequality? Because rich folk, rich women in Texas, they can get on a plane, fly to another state and get an abortion if they want to. They can fly to another country if they want to. It's poor women that are going to be hit really hard.
I think what this reflects more than anything else, Anand, is just how abortion continues to be one of the most deeply polarizing issues in American society. And there's a very healthy debate as to whether or not the Supreme Court ruling from Roe v. Wade should continue to stand. Even a number of liberal judges like Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought that it was bad law, or whether, as Ameshia said before, it should be something that should be taken up by the U.S. Congress and codified by the legislature. Although I think tactically over the next year and a half, given the current makeup of the Congress, there's really no chance that Republicans would allow this rollback to take place or for Roe v. Wade to be codified into law. So I think this deeply polarizing debate will be with us for weeks, months, and many years to come.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Have a great weekend.